Hello everybody. I'm Vicki Streer and I'm an educational consultant advising schools and former school principal, having had over 15 years of school leadership experience.
And greetings everybody. My name's Richard Leonard. I'm an architect, director of Hayball Architects, and have been involved in education planning now for over 3 decades.
We're going to talk today about school design and about the master planning process and a strategic approach to doing this. Great schools are led by great leaders who think strategically, who understand that the decisions that are made about a school are taking a whole school perspective. You know, millions of dollars are spent on building new schools. And yet sometimes those decisions are made in a rather rushed way when schools realise, oh, we've got the money to do something, let's do it. But really the decisions you make are decisions that need to be good for the long term. There are a number of key questions that need to be answered when you're thinking about the strategic design of schools. For example, what is our school's desired approach to learning? What are the pedagogical considerations and what's the link between the spaces that are being designed and the kind of teaching and learning that takes place in those spaces? When thinking about school design, how well do existing facilities support the school's approach to learning, and what needs to change to meet future needs? How well do our existing spaces relate to one another? And when we're looking at building something new, is there an opportunity to improve connections and the way we use spaces around the school? And the final one, of course, is where is the money going to come from to develop these school buildings? What do we mean by the term strategic design of schools? Well, high-performing schools understand and activate the link between the school's key strategic processes to plan for new school developments or redevelopments. High-performing schools engage in robust and collaborative processes involving research, inquiry, consulting with all stakeholders to reinforce, change or shape a school's educational purpose and values and set strategic priorities. The strategic plan is the expression of these thought processes and is the responsibility of the governing body of the school and school leadership. And it's such an important document because from the strategic plan flow further key strategic processes. The development of a really clear statement of the school's vision for teaching and learning, the financial plan that provides the timeframes that will indicate when a school will be in a position to build, and the facilities master plan. Linked with that, a plan for technology and how that's going to be integrated into any building project. So, how does the vision for teaching and learning shape the design of schools? Now, you can see here an outline of the various elements that are included in a vision for teaching and learning. In particular, relevant to the issue of designing new facilities, we need to think about the learner, the preferred pedagogy and the modes of learning. Is there blended learning occurring at your school? Is learning flipped? Is it cross-age? Is the style of delivery sometimes didactic, sometimes not? What is the relationship between space, pedagogy and learning opportunities? An important part of the process of developing that vision for teaching and learning is to make sure that all of your staff are on board with the vision, because I can talk from personal experience that if people are not on board, you will get blocking and you will not see the use of the building in the way that it might have been envisaged. A good example is, in my experience, a library development where when it opened, the vision was a place where students had agency, where students were directly involved in determining which spaces they were going to use and for what purpose. But when they walked in, they were confronted with a bunch of signs that said, do not, when you do this, do that. So that was, that was a change process about the users that needed to, ideally is done up front. So that's another reason why that vision and getting everyone on board is so important. The master plan is so important because, as I said originally, the decisions the school makes today will affect the learning environments of generations of students and teachers. How it's developed and what it looks like will depend on the individual needs of the school, but everyone will be grateful for good decisions, while ill-considered decisions may impede learning programs and actually be very costly to you. I can think of an example of, again, moving the uniform shop at one of my schools, and the head of the facilities committee bemoaning the fact that this was now the third time it had been moved in under 10 years, adding to a cost of about $500,000 to the school's building costs. Significant investments are made in building projects. Good planning means that you get the best outcomes in the most efficient way. Now, as a school leader, I know that being actively involved in the planning process is so important, and being actively involved in it up front and being really clear about what you want is very important before the process moves into the hands of others. And Rick is now going to talk to you more about that process.
Thanks so much, Vicki. And I think this is a really interesting start from my point of view, because talking with schools and working through master plans is such a complex business. And you talked about the number of people involved. And from a designer's point of view, the different perspectives that they all bring is such a critical thing. For instance, if you're a board member, you may be thinking about a legacy project. If you're the business manager, you're thinking of dollars. If you're the facilities manager, you're probably thinking about maintenance. And if you're a teacher, you're obviously thinking about the teaching and learning model. If you're a student, you've got a very different perspective about maybe more the social aspects of education. Parents inevitably will be thinking about investment and perhaps just a better model of what they had. And if you're a supplier involved in this business, you're probably thinking about the supply chain. So balancing all of those different perspectives is one of the really tough parts, I think, of master planning. So the point I always make at this stage to all of the people around the master planning table as the good news is that this is the time when you can impact the future of the project and probably make the most profound impact in terms of the things that you bring to the table and the designers take away to build the eventual design of the particular project. So this is the time that the really big and important decisions are made. And always what we say in master planning is that how can we not do it without the student voice, and to do it in a way that actually is much more student-led. And in a recent project, we actually developed a student-led research project where all of the students went away, formed little groups, and really came up with some really deep thinking and great responses in the way that they wanted to see their campus developed. Again, from a designer's point of view, I think it's important to understand how we master plan. And as we say, it's always from the inside out. Vicki has talked about, why we do it. And you go out to how do we enact those values and beliefs? What are the education principles we adopt? And it's actually not till the third layer, if you like, the what. What are the practices and actions and solutions that the designer can actually start to do the work? So really, this is saying it's got to be founded on a fundamental understanding of the school's teaching and learning pedagogy, vision and mission, and then the designers can start to undertake their work. And a really good example of this from our point of view is just over a decade ago, we were working with Dandenong High School, and they were really going through a fundamental rethink of their teaching and learning model, how they were doing things. They had a very difficult student and community cohort to deal with. And the master planning process took about a year, but of that year, probably 10 months of that was really taken up with the school rethinking their teaching and learning model. What that led to was schools within a school model, the Swiss model, breaking up the school 2,100 students into 7 house buildings. And that obviously informed the master plan. but very much the design driven by the pedagogical thinking. And how we explored that was a really interesting way to use a day in the life of a student. So the teachers came up with examples of 4 students, very different students, and explored a day in the life. And from a designer's point of view, that was the richest piece of briefing that we could elicit from the school that help inform the master planning and the eventual design. We also reinforce with schools that the whole process is an exploratory process, it's fluid. And we have to all be confident that we're exploring all issues and that you don't always necessarily know where the end point is. So it's an important point in time to allow those exploration of ideas and different views and options and possibilities. And I must say, from a designer, I hate using the word master plan because it infers that there is a building at the end, and that is usually the case, but not always the case. And I think it's far more important to think of a master plan in terms of, say, an enabling development framework, which is a far richer process. It's not just producing a rigorous blueprint that you must follow for richer development, but it's got flexibility, it's allowing future change, it's incorporating guidelines and policies, and it's self-correcting. And I think the Japanese have got a wonderful take on this, mikansai, which is the process of leaving things slightly undone. What you can do is get to a certain point where you develop enough of the master plan to say, well, that's got us to what we want. That's got the main objectives. You don't necessarily have to spend all the time developing a master plan that is, got a 50-year vision when you know you're not going to be able to enact that. Again, another concept that we tell schools to consider a master plan is that it's not one size fits all. There is no one way to do things, and there is no one form of master plan that is necessarily the way to do it. It has to be tailored to what you need. Another concept we use is the concept of 3 horizons, and this can be transferred in a number of ways, where there's aspirations, where the first horizon, that first sort of stepping off point for delivering a master plan is what's attainable, or what's possible, or what is much further out there, which may be in the far distance, the aspirational issues. From a program, understanding the short term, what you have to or can deliver quickly, what you would need to do in a medium term, or again, what happens years down the track. And for priorities is probably the most important, understanding what is essential, what are the things we really have to solve now, what's just important and what's optional. From this point of view, I think it's important to understand that buildings exist in space and time, and that the life of a building, well, it encompasses many different lives, actually. You know, if you talk about the building fabric, the skin, it's probably got a life of 20 years, services 7 to 15 years, and the internal space arrangements can be thought of more as theatre sets, if you like, that they are going to be subject to change driven by teachers or the school thinking about different ways of doing things, future technologies coming in, etc., etc. From the point of view of next steps, we know that every master plan should have all of the stages and the priorities demonstrated for the school to give them that framework for progressing. Even in this case, which is highly complex in an urban site, it took 7 stages to enable the school to complete that final master planning process. And that can be very difficult and very, very torturous for the school. But again, it's mapped a way forward for them. And lastly, I think one of the whole transformational aspect of master plans was the example of Domremy College in Five Dock in Sydney. And their ultimate goal was a very expensive building that was going to be a key piece of their new teaching and learning pedagogy. And we undertook a master plan, and the little blue building was one of the facilities scheduled to be pulled out as part of the master planning, but was seen as an interim opportunity to actually trial things in a prototyping sense. Working with the school and the students and working with a key educator, in this case, Dr. Ben Cleveland, collectively, we were able to come up with concept of a prototype. And this was a place where the school could try before you buy, if you like. They could trial new teaching and learning pedagogies. And the idea was that this would help inform the eventual design of the new building and progress the master planning thinking of the whole school. And we asked a number of questions. How does it work for students? What's the teaching and learning like? How, which spaces are you actually preferring and why, et cetera, et cetera. So finally, that did lead to the new building. But the process, and this is the lesson from my point of view, the process helped inform the design of that new building. But the more important thing was that it did so by facilitating a collaborative process of staff and students, and facilitated the transformation of the teaching and learning practice. And that for me was one of the greatest parts, if you like, of that particular master plan. Vicki, I'd like to bring you in here with some of your experiences in master planning. I've got to declare to everybody, you and I have actually never worked together, but when we talked about master planning, we were absolutely coming from that same sort of framework and thinking, which is wonderful. But how do you, as a leader, find ways to facilitate the transformational process from that master planning level moving forward?
Well, I think it involves teamwork and consulting with a range of people around your school. I love starting with students and getting them to perhaps take a map of the school. I gave them a camera last time we did it, and they went around the school and took a whole lot of images, and then we put them up on a wall, and they had to vote on what were the spaces they really liked and what were the ones they didn't like and why. And that opened up a really rich discussion, bringing students' input into the way they felt about different parts of the school, which really needed to address issues of circulation and dead spaces and so on. And actually, I think that circulation problem solving is one of the pieces that probably should remain set in a master plan, because if you don't work out good circulation and then don't stick to the plan, you end up with a bit of a mess. You don't want some nice building put in the spot where actually you might have wanted to put an oval.
I have one really good example that builds on your point about asking the students. And many years ago, we were consulting to the students. We asked the simple question, where do you learn best? There were the inevitable responses, well, it's at home and in bed, with a computer on my lap and, just tapping away. But one of the students instantaneously said, it's with Miss So-and-so, the maths teacher, and on the oval. And it was an interesting response because it wasn't as silly as it sounds, but the student was actually talking about, if you like, the sort of the biophilic, the whole wellness issues, I think, just being outside, being in the sun to enjoy class and to enjoy teaching and learning.
That certainly picked up on one of the areas I've been most excited about in school design in the last 15 years. Through research that I did and visiting other schools, is looking at nature pedagogy and outdoor learning, and going back and looking at the sort of forest schools movements of decades ago. And I think in the COVID environment, those lessons have more and more value, because we need to be thinking about designing spaces where it's possible to get outside, where good air circulation occurs. And Rick, your point about, or your example about the students who loved the teacher who worked with them on the oval, does raise a question that is often, has often been posed to me. Do the spaces really matter when you have a great teacher? And you talked about the ability of spaces to transform practice. Absolutely, there is a link between quality teaching and making the most of the spaces that we provide. The point here is, and I hope the point that we've made clear to people watching today, is that it is holistic. Everything is linked. Good practice, good spaces, good learning, they're all enablers that are interconnected.
Yes, I think Professor Stephen Heppel has a very good comment on that. It's the incremental improvements. They're small, but there's thousands of them. And it's not rocket science, but you've got to get them all interlinking.